Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of Seek, Search, Succeed, a podcast dedicated to helping sales enablement pros that are transitioning to new roles. Today, we're joined by Rae Cheney, sales enablement specialist at Morningstar and board member of Chicago Sales Enablement Society. Rae, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Jared, thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited that you're here. Before we get into it, for everyone watching, when you're not doing sales enablement, who are you?
That's a great question. When I'm not enabling sellers, I guess I'm an avid reader and player of Scrabble and a dog owner.
So do you play Words with Friends still?
I do not. I am like a Scrabble loyalist, so
Can't be tainted
cannot.
by virtual cheatable Scrabble.
Exactly. I need the triple word scores where they belong. Don't mess with Words with Friends.
Oh, this fits you so well. I can't wait for people to learn more about you so they understand why this all makes so much sense. Before we talk about work stuff, what are you reading right now? Anything good that people should check out?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Ninth House, which is a fantasy novel, but it's all set on the campus of Yale. And it's kind of about like skull and crossbones and other secret societies. And it's interesting because it's all rooted in reality. It's all like real organizations and people, but with magic.
That is very interesting. So our offices are kind of near Harvard in New England. And one of my favorite things to do is go on these like Harvard nighttime walking tours. It's just so kind of creepy and old. And I'm sure if you went to school there and you're watching this, you think that's the nerdiest thing ever and it's overrated. But for me, it's really cool.
Totally agree. I'm a big fan of going on like 1, nighttime spooky tours, and 2, looking at beautiful college campuses.
Yeah. So the Scrabble thing totally makes sense. Your background is a little bit unique. Sales enablement people come from so many different places, but quickly tell us the story how you ended up in enablement.
Yeah, so initially I was a librarian, and I was managing a public library when I was recruited to go work for a software company that makes library software. And I was initially hired to create their e-learning, and then went on to manage not only their e-learning team, but also their live training delivery teams. And when I was doing that job was when I was recruited into sales enablement, which was not a thing I had ever heard of before. Hold on, Jared, really quickly, because I'm realizing I need to shut this door. There's people walking by and I want to make sure it's not impacting the audio.
No worries.
1 sec. All right. They're having a mayoral debate in the auditorium that's right behind me today. So there's a lot of action happening around me.
The mayor, the insurance not for this, the action outside. They're like,
yeah, just
we heard Search, Seek, Succeeds going on in there. So much of what we do in enablement is around teaching and even like content storage, like the librarian background is so interesting. When we first met, we talked a little bit about, I come from a sales background, you come from a teaching background. I feel like I lack in the teaching side, where you're just a rock star at both sides anyway. But I'm curious, for other teachers, people in non-traditional roles, how do they make that leap into enablement to do something that might be uncomfortable and really different?
Yeah, I feel like the influx of applicants that I've seen of people who are trying to make the jump from education into sort of the tech space has been huge, understandably, with all the difficulties of teaching in the last couple of years. And I've also had teacher friends and former librarian friends who've asked me how I made the leap. And the advice I would give if you are a teacher who is looking to pivot into doing sort of instructional design, sales enablement, any of these kinds of roles, is it's wonderful and lovely that you have a teaching background, but the way that you can differentiate and sell yourself is by really playing up the technology that you were using to do all of that, specifically during the pandemic. So if you were having to use learning management systems, and if you were having to think about how to have like interactive virtual courses, I think those are the things that you can really play up. And I'll say, even when I got recruited to this sales enablement role, the differentiator was that on my LinkedIn, I had listed WalkMe because we did an implementation at my previous job of a digital adoption tool. They were specifically looking to bring a digital adoption tool into Morningstar, so that was something they were looking for. So do yourself a favor of like list by name the software that you are familiar with using. I know that when I'm looking at applications, I'm looking like, are you using things like or exactly what I'm using today, you know?
So you mentioned looking at applications. Usually on this show, we talk to people who recently found new roles to help other people figure out what they could be looking for. But this show's a little different today because you are actually looking to hire someone for a new role. Yeah, awesome. So tell us about that. What's the role? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I'm super excited. Morningstar is bringing on a sales enablement platform for the first time, and we are hiring somebody to come be our administrator for the platform. And more so than just doing, the governing of licenses and things, but really somebody who can help us bridge the connection between marketing, sales, and sales enablement. I think, whenever I talk to other enablers, it's kind of all over the place what people are doing in terms of how they manage go-to-markets and who owns what. So this person is somebody who can really help like interface with all of these different groups and make sure that the content we're putting in is useful, the way we're curating it is really useful, usable by our sellers. So yeah, the role is specific to that piece of software, and we're looking for somebody hopefully who's jazzed about governance and taxonomies.
You mentioned in the break, there's a mayoral debate going on in the next room. Maybe you could just sneak over there and ask if anyone's passionate about governance, because that seems like the closest way to find somebody like that. Speaking of, you're in a really cool studio right now. I think that's just one of the benefits of working at Morningstar. If people are watching this and thinking about applying, what other kind of cool perks are there to working with you guys?
Yeah, I'll say that Morningstar has been like hands down the best place I've ever worked for. And it is cool when we get these benefits of resources like an in-house studio. Behind me is a giant auditorium where we're having the local mayoral debate here in Chicago. We've got a beautiful 7th floor patio in downtown Chicago that when the weather is nice, we've got patio parties. And I'll just say that the company as a whole is one that I feel really good about working for. Like the values that the company has, they're very outspoken about the strides that they're making in terms of DEI, pay equity, sort of just their attention to ESG, and I don't know, their values really align with the values that I have. And it's rare that we get to feel that way, especially in corporate America. So, and the final thing I'll say is we have a term like Morningstar nice. The people here are just so, so nice. And the added benefit is they're also really competent. And it doesn't always come that you get those things in the same package.
Yeah, I feel that from the first time I met you, I was like, Ray is such a cool, nice person. Honestly, I thought you worked for the chicken nugget company at first, and I was a little disappointed when I found out it was investments. But you were so awesome. We had such a good time the first time we met. That's why I was so excited to have you on this to talk about this new role, because it's a really good opportunity for somebody. I want to talk more about kind of what you're looking for and help people with some more ideas if they're looking for other roles. But I'm curious, before we get into that, what kind of stuff does your team focus on at Morningstar? You talked about implementing this new sales enablement solution, but what are like some of the key goals that you're working on this quarter and for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so what is really cool about our sales enablement team, I would say one is that we don't just help sales, we also support our customer success organization and our support organization. So we've got a couple of audiences. And the beauty of the way that our teams are structured, I guess it would be helpful if I describe what my specific role is. So let me start by saying that I do technology training and adoption. So in our team, the role, I serve all of those audiences, sales, support, and success, in helping them make sure that they're able to use our internal tech stack, as effectively as possible. So our CRMs, our, soon to be sales enablement platform, all of the things that we're spending money on to help make sure our sellers can do the jobs best they can. My job is to help make sure that they know how to use those and they're using them well. So in my role, I kind of serve all of the audiences, but we also have people on the team who have very narrow focused audiences, right? So we have somebody who just is for our success team, somebody who's just for our SDRs, somebody who's just for our strategic account executives. So it's really nice that we have enough people and enough clarity of boundaries of like, we know exactly what we're doing and who we're serving. I know that especially like in smaller enablement teams, sometimes you are sort of tasked with doing everything for everyone, which nobody can do well, I don't think. So, so yeah, that is sort of the outlier or the organization of our team. You know, there's a couple people like me who serve everybody, and then there's some with very narrow focuses. I think all of us are really excited this year about the sales enablement platform. It's something we've wanted to get up and running for a couple of years. We're all ready, and the marketing teams are super excited. Our, you know, sales org is thrilled. And that is going to be at least the big focus of my attention. And then I would say another sort of broad thing that our team is working on is how can we make our training scalable across all of those groups? Because there is training that's applicable to all three. And so it's like, how do we figure out where there are the overlaps in content so that we're not duplicating efforts in our team and really getting more streamlined in using content well?
So there's all these different roles, and like there's the name of the role, and then what the role actually does day to day. Working with Sales Enablement Society, you probably see like there's 200 different names of roles for revenue enablement, for sales enablement, specialist managers, you name it.
Yeah.
If people are watching this and they're looking for a new position, just in your experience, like what should they be looking for if they can't count on the name of the role being a good description of the job?
Oh, Jared, this is a very well-timed question. Like, I would almost think you planted it, or that I planted it for you, and I didn't. Something that I am noticing, and this seems to be increasing, and I get it. I get that in today's job hunting, it can be soul killing because you're putting a lot of stuff out there, and it can feel like you're operating in a vacuum. You know, a lot of companies don't do the courtesy of letting you know where you're at or when you've been withdrawn or any of that information. So I get that there's a bit of, and I think as sales enablement people in particular, I would advise not to spray and pray because I feel like I see a lot of people who are just like applying because they see the title and they're not actually looking at the job description. And so my advice would be like, I know that it's so painful when you're like deep in the job hunt to look at endless job descriptions and stuff, but be thoughtful about really reading through what the description is and not relying on a title, because you're right, and titles and sales enablement can be word salad, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. You see, like I get so many on my LinkedIn that try and share different roles. I find myself before I share anything on my my network, I have to message the recruiter and ask, what is this job really about? Like I see the title, but what do you want someone to be able to do? And even at the recruiter level, they sometimes message back and say, I don't understand, like the role is for this position. They don't even understand like the nuances of the title probably don't fit what needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was like, you know, this position that we're hiring is totally new at Morningstar. It'll be the first person who has it. So we had to sit and think like, well, what combination of words describe what we're doing, right? So totally understand that. I'll also say that, like, I don't even want to say a pet peeve, but like to my mind, something that definitely differentiates candidates for me and has in the 15 years that I've been a hiring manager is writing a cover letter. And I know that there are people who think that that is outdated, and I certainly understand that it is time consuming, but there are so many people who apply and on the face of their resume, I'm like, I don't see how this equals this, right? So help me connect the dots. And especially for somebody like we're talking about teachers trying to make the leap, you got to tell me how what you were doing makes sense for this. I also think that's an important one for people who are maybe changing levels of jobs. Like if you've been a people manager and you're applying for an individual contributor role, give me some context about why you're making that change, or what about this role is appealing to you. Because otherwise, you know, it can seem a bit like what I've called like a life preserver candidate, where they're just looking for anything. And don't do yourself the disservice of having a manager like me think like they must just be applying for anything and everything because you didn't help tell the story of why this role makes sense for you.
I love that we're getting into this. One of the things I wrote down was, do you read cover letters? I should have known better. You're a reader. I should have known you read them all. And I love what you said about reading the job description and making sure like your resume fits into that. You know, when you're looking at resumes, I guess we talked about cover letters, so just resumes specifically, what other things are you looking for? Like, I think the science of setting up your resume and making yourself look good on one piece of paper is so difficult. Like, what are you looking for on those?
Yeah, it's so subjective. And I'll say, like, just as a personal hobby, like I love helping people craft resumes. So I have probably more opinions than you need to hear on this day. But I'll say things that I'm looking for are look, y'all, I'm a librarian at heart, but like spelling errors and sort of just formatting, like I want somebody who is thoughtful and careful enough in like their first impression to really do a good job there. So it's important to me to see that somebody has taken the time and really read through their own work to make sure it's ready to present. Something I'm really kind of against is the newer trend of putting pictures into resumes, because I just think that that is a slippery slope where we potentially are opening people up to discrimination that they wouldn't otherwise be subject to at that level. So I've always discouraged people that I know from jumping on board with that trend, and I certainly don't that is not something I'm like, well, let's see whose picture is the best, right? Like that to me is not important. Something a bit wild that I don't find valuable is when people include like personal info. I don't know, I'm curious, but like I've had people tell me very strange personal hobbies on their resumes that do not relate to the job. Like somebody mentioned a preference for orange tabby cats. What?
Okay.
That
That's important to the job, you know? Maybe there's cats in the office, you don't know.
Yeah, sure, right?
Yeah, there's so many things that can go into it, and not everything needs to go into it. One thing we
Yeah.
teach sellers as enablers, right, is to know their prospects and know who they're reaching out to. Sounds like the same thing is true for applying for jobs. Like go on LinkedIn, figure out who the hiring manager is, look at their background. Were they a teacher and a librarian? And grammar is really important, and the structure and everything's done the right way are really important. Did they go to a similar college you went to, or is there something else you could connect on in the cover letter? I don't think we do that enough. We preach it, but do we actually do it enough, like, to research our
Yeah.
prospects?
100%. There's an excellent nonprofit here in Chicago called Rework that provides training to overlooked communities. And it basically trains people to be sellers, to do like BDR, SDR roles. But I love that what they're saying is in training people to have those skills, they're also training people for how to do a job hunt, because it's very similar skill sets, right?
Yeah, it is. It's so, I never put it together, but it's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys are watching and you need some resume tips, in our Seek, Search, Succeed guide, we have resume tips, we have additional resources. The Bigtincan recruiting team is offered to review resumes and cover letters before you submit them to other companies even. We're totally cool with that. So make sure you check out Seek, Search, Succeed online and check out those resume tips.
Awesome.
Speaking of building skills, one thing a mentor of mine told me years ago was that I should always be interviewing for jobs, even if I'm not interested in changing roles, but it's a skill. And if you don't practice a skill, you lose it, just like any other skill in the world. For people that haven't interviewed recently, when you're interviewing people for this new role, what will the process be like? Not so much what are you looking for, but like what can they expect to go through and be ready for?
Yeah, I can tell them like both what this is like, what my experience was like, and I'll also say at the last job that I had, which I really loved, it was kind of long. It was kind of a long process of doing a couple of rounds of very like conversational interviews, and then ultimately ending with like a presentation to important stakeholders. And that's what we'll be doing for this role. It's what I did when I interviewed for my role. And like I said previously, and what I like about it, I get that it can be painstaking when there's kind of long interview cycles, but both at my previous job and at this job, by the time I got to the end of the interview cycle, I knew 100% that like this was a place for me, that I wanted to work with these people. I wanted to work in this role, that I wanted to work in this building. You know, these are all things that I think from my perspective, it's just as important that the candidate feels like excited and has had a chance to sort of interrogate us as the hiring people. You know, you should be able to feel so certain and confident that a role is for you. So somewhat of a long cycle, but one that I think really guarantees the best chance of success for both the candidate and us. And we are super on board of like, I want you to ask questions and I want you to make sure that this is going to be a good fit for you. I don't want you to show up and 3 months later be like, this was a terrible mistake, right? Like that doesn't serve any of us.
Yeah, the interview goes both ways. Like when you meet with an HR person in the interview, it's not as much that they're sussing you out as much as they're making sure that you've gotten all your questions answered about, is this like the kind of place you want to work for the next who knows how long, right? It could be the rest of your life almost.
Absolutely. And Morningstar, I feel like, does a really good job of making sure that there is ample opportunity for candidates to feel welcome and invited to ask those kinds of questions.
And is your new role, is it remote, hybrid, in office? What's the structure?
Hybrid. So we've got offices in Chicago, New York, Toronto, and Seattle. So we're looking for somebody who is close to one of those four offices. And our current setup, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future, is 3 days in, 2 days remote.
Okay. So if you're interested in learning more about that position, you can find the details about the Sales Enablement Program Manager role on the Morningstar website.
Yeah.
So I want to circle back to talking about the initiatives you're working on right now. Biggest thing is you're implementing a new sales enablement solution, which is obviously near and dear to my heart.
Right.
We talked about, we're not going to mention who it is. We're just going to talk about generic use cases of implementing new tools. So
Sure.
let's talk about, if you're implementing a new tool for your team, what are some of the short and long-term metrics that you guys are tracking to see if this program is successful or worth the investment?
I think it's going to be really interesting. We can sort of hypothesize on the things that we'll get started with, like how often is a piece of marketing content being used? How often does that actually lead to a sale, right? How do we start tying it to our pipeline and our closed won deals? But I think that this is going to be something that's going to be a bit of an evolution, and something we're kind of hoping that whoever we bring into this role can give us some of their past experience of what has mattered when they've worked in these kinds of platforms elsewhere, knowing that every company is kind of different. But yeah, I know that that's not as super helpful because it's like we're in the discovery process ourselves of what we're going to be tracking. So to that end, if anybody's watching and has input, add me on LinkedIn and let's talk.
Yeah. And so there's some really good resources out there to help do that kind of thing. And one of them I want to talk about, and I know I know is important to you, Sales Enablement Society. They have some really good tools and blog articles and connections you can make to learn about proving ROI for sales enablement programs. If you're looking for a new role, how do you go back and look at your previous program and show what you brought to that role and how it helped your old organization? Talk to me a little bit about Sales Enablement Society for those people watching that don't know about it.
Yeah, so Sales Enablement Society has been such a gift to me professionally and personally. I've met just some of the greatest people. It was funny, the first conference I went to was last year, and Jared, this is where we met in person. And I was looking around and I was like, sales enablement people are so much like librarians. Like everybody just genuinely wants to help other people, right? And everybody is really good at icebreakers because we do this for a living, right? So Sales Enablement Society, I would encourage anybody who's job hunting or in the field to get connected with the larger organization. And then especially if you've got a local group, our group in Chicago is one of the strongest ones. But it has been invaluable in terms of just finding people to network with and to bounce ideas off of when you're just sort of in the field. And it's awesome. Any question I've had, I put it to just my fellow board members, usually within an hour or less. I've gotten like 3 different resources of responses just because this is who we are as people. We love to share info and help. And also it's been really incredible to see, as you know, over the last couple of months in this really tough market, we've seen a lot of layoffs, and to watch how Sales Enablement Society, among all of the other great enablement organizations out there, have just like rallied around to try and help people find that next position.
Yeah, SES is great. The SES experience in Atlanta, where we first met last year, was so much fun. Like you said, met a lot of cool people. And sales enablement people are an interesting breed. I like doing these podcasts because they're always prepared to talk on a meeting. Like that's part of our gig. So that always works out really good for me. They always have some kind of good AV set up. It's much easier than talking to people that aren't, employee facing or on webinars all the time. So check
Yeah.
out Sales Enablement Society. If you're in Central Texas or Austin like me, we're actually trying to revamp the local chapter of SES. Yeah. So if you want to get involved in that, you probably already follow me on LinkedIn. If you're watching this, shoot me a message. We're trying to get it going. We need more people. It's a little bit of a process. I'm in the throes of SKO planning season because we're on a July to July year. So it's like that's kind of
Oh,
falling off for me and I need help. But yeah, so if you're watching this from Central Texas, let's get it going.
nice.
So before we wrap up, anything else you want to share with people on the job hunt? Any tips, advice, any thoughts at all?
Yeah, I think the biggest things that I've seen that have been leading to success in sales enablement specifically is take advantage of building your network. Go meet people in as much as you can, because people out here especially in this field, are so invested in trying to help. If you know, I know we talked briefly about preparing for interviews and the idea of interviewing, like that you should do it on an ongoing basis. Even if you're not doing that professionally, like, you know, with actual job interviews, this is something my husband and I do every time either one of us interviews, is like sit down and think of what are like the top 5 to 10 most commonly asked questions, and then come up with solid examples. That to me is like the biggest selling point, when somebody doesn't just say like the right words, but says, here's the time that I overcame this, or really succeeded at that, or changed somebody's mind, or, you know, so if you can come to the table prepared to speak to your own experience, I think that'll give you a leg up over people who maybe just sort of study the generic practiced answers.
And speaking of networking, how can people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Rae Cheney. Do you have it spelled somewhere, Jared, or should I say it
Nico,
out loud?
put this in, put it on the screen for us. Awesome. Well, if you're looking for a new role, check out our Seek, Search, Succeed guide. I'll put it in the comments below. Big thanks to Rae, and we'll see everybody next time.